Welcome to Forbidden Planet 42, where we're celebrating 42 fantastic years of the Forbidden Planet store in London. And we're also seeking to answer the ultimate question to life, the universe, and everything. I am here in this session with a man who needs no introduction at all, but I'm going to give him one anyway. He's an incredibly prolific and celebrated novelist, comics author, biographer, screenwriter, playwright, and audio performer. Famous for Stardust, American Gods, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, Good Omens, created with Terry Pratchett, Neverwhere, Marvel 1602, Miracle Man, two of my favorites, Black Orchid and Snow Glass Apples. And he's just narrated Dirk Magg's fantastic audible audio adaptation of perhaps his most celebrated work, The Sandman. This is, of course, Neil Gaiman. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to virtually be here. I mean, of course, I'm not here. I'm here. You're there, but we're here.
And it's nice to have you virtually join us. Can you remember when you first became aware of Forbidden Planet?
Yes. I first became aware of Forbidden Planet through the Brian Bolland tube ads.
Yeah, they're lovely. Yeah. Actually, we had Brian on this show a couple of days ago, and he shared with us all his original artwork for those great promo pieces that he did. So there'll be another strand of this where we'll be showing all of those off. But yeah, he still has all the original artwork.
Well, when I went up to London, I used to go to St Anne's Court, and before that to Berwick Street.
Yeah.
To Dark They Were and Golden-Eyed, and then somewhere, I don't even remember the timetable of Dark They Were stopping existing and FP coming into existence. But I know that 1983-ish, when I started as a young journalist, writing about comics and things, there was Forbidden Planet. And it was the place that you went, and it was the place that I went, and it became, very rapidly, it became my haunt. And the pub that we talk about now as the Café Munchen, but before it was the Café Munchen, I think it was something like that. It was either a Red Lion or a White Hart or something like that. And I think the very first ever Forbidden Planet thing I did was go to a Brian Aldiss signing event as I think it must have been as a young journalist. In September-ish, 83. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that does sound totally right.
And it would have been for one of the Heliconia books. And I just remember making friends there. It's that thing where you make a friend who remains a friend for the rest of your life, with Colin Greenland. And Colin, who I think at that time was still part of the Interzone Collective. And he was there, I think, to talk to Brian. And Colin and I became friends, and we've been friends now for many, many years. He's had a career as an author. He still writes, I think, sometimes, but a lot of what he's been doing has been getting his partner, Susanna Clarke, from working, looking after her and being with her and that kind of thing. But it is so strange going back to the Forbidden Planet people. So that is my first Forbidden Planet memory. I might have shopped there before that, but that Brian Aldiss signing was sort of where it began. And very rapidly after that, I was adopted. It probably is the best way of saying it. I would have been 22, and people like Gamma, Paul Gamble, who was part of Titan Distributors and worked in FP,
yeah,
just decided I was good and interesting and should be supported, and they would point me at people who were going to be coming to the shop when the way that you found out about those things was grapevine. And I would get interviews as a young journalist and stuff, and became friends with people. I remember somewhere in there, you know, Nick Landau by 1986 decided I was to write the Douglas Adams book.
Yeah.
A couple of people had already, I think Richard Hollis, who worked in FP2,
Yes,
had originally signed up to do it and then couldn't do it, was too busy, had lost interest, whatever. And they offered it to Kim Newman, who said, no, not interested, but you should get Neil to do it because he's already interviewed Douglas a few times and I know he'd love to do it.
Yeah.
And so they asked me and I said yes, and had a wonderful time writing that book.
Yeah, and that's really segued nicely into the very person I was going to ask you about. Part of this event is not just celebrating 42 years of FP. A big part of it is celebrating Douglas and his relationship with the store and his history with Nick, with Vivian, with those people. So, what was your relationship with Douglas like? How did you find him?
I met Douglas around that same time. I think The Meaning of Liff had come out or was just about to come out, and he was doing interviews for it. And I did a long interview with him for Penthouse, who back then, you know, the idea was they had naked ladies and a reader's letters page. And apart from that, all of the content was mainstream. So they wanted a Douglas Adams interview, and I did a Douglas Adams interview, and then sold all of the bits that were left over in the Douglas Adams interview to Fantasy Empire. And then Knave magazine asked me to do another interview with Douglas. So I went over with a photographer and did a whole another interview with Douglas. And we really got on. We got on very, very well, Douglas and I, in the way that, you know, he would have been about 30.
Yeah.
And was a very tall, brilliant success. And I was 22 and was a penniless young journalist with dreams of one day being a writer.
Yeah.
But we liked each other a lot, which was nice, and became very useful in the future when I was signed up to do the Hitchhiker's book. And Douglas sort of gave me free run of his filing cabinets in a way that I don't think he would have given me otherwise. So I would just sort of camp out at Douglas's place in Islington and just read my way through all of the Hitchhiker scripts, all of the variants, all of the everything. And
that must have been such a delight to be able to do that. How fantastic.
It was. I remember turning up once and Douglas was on the phone with somebody and he ushered me into his office and had me sit there while he was on the phone, which was an odd kind of thing to do because normally you wouldn't have somebody waiting, but he was on the phone and he was obviously enjoying his phone call a lot. And then he got off the phone. He said, "That was John Cleese. I was just on the phone with John Cleese." And I thought, I love this. I love what a fanboy you are. And you don't have a lot of people that you're a fan of, but you are name dropping John Cleese because you're so happy that you've grown up to be the kind of person who talks to John Cleese on the phone. I think they were doing forget if it was a Comic Relief or an Amnesty International thing. It was whatever he did the Young Zaphod short story for. It was for that. But Douglas and I stayed friends. I moved to the States, and Douglas and I emailed once I'd moved. Weirdly, I helped him on one thing because he wanted to get in touch with Robert Sheckley to write the novelization of Starship Titanic, and I put them in touch. I don't think that worked out, and eventually Terry Jones wrote the novelization. But I loved having been at least a part of putting Sheckley and Douglas together. And then I said no, and I'm so glad I did for several reasons. When Douglas came to me in about 97, 98, and asked if I would do the radio adaptation of Hitchhikers, of the remaining Hitchhikers books. And I thought about it for a few minutes. I may have actually thought about it for a day. It was that thing where I couldn't believe that I was being asked. I felt like Douglas Adams on the phone to John Cleese. Douglas had actually gone, Neil gets it, Neil gets the voice, Neil could do this. And I loved it. And then I said no. And I said no because my plate was too full with my stuff. And because I thought, it's also the kind of thing where there is weirdly no upside to doing this. If I do it brilliantly and well, people will go, isn't Douglas Adams clever? If I screw it up, people will go, didn't Neil Gaiman ruin Douglas's brilliant thing? There is no upside. And what happened, of course, which has had wonderful knock-on effects down the years, is Douglas went to Dirk Maggs. And because Douglas went to Dirk, and because it was perfectly up Dirk's alley, and it was absolutely the thing that Dirk was put on this earth to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Dirk did it. He did it brilliantly. Because he did that, when they did the stage play of Hitchhikers, Dirk invited me to be the voice of the book at one point. Because of that, I met Polly Adams, and Polly became, a very special friend and just sort of one of my people. And also because of that, Dirk and I wound up doing Neverwhere for the BBC, and that worked out so well. We did Good Omens, and that worked out so well. We did Stardust, and that worked out so well. We did Anansi Boys, and how the Marquis got his coat back and stuff. And then when Dirk and the BBC parted company, because the BBC was all about cutting back and Dirk was all about going for broke, Dirk got to pitch to Audible the thing that he and I had first pitched to the BBC in 1992, which was the idea of doing Sandman, the comics, as audio drama. And Audible said yes, and we recorded it, and it's become the biggest success in Audible's history. I got an email the other day from one of the Audible higher-ups telling me that it had got to 100,000 actual listens faster than anything in Audible's history, including Harry Potter. And I was just so thrilled. And I thought
that must be tremendously gratifying to have worked on it for the 20 years plus that you have, and now to be in this situation where you're number one on the New York Times bestseller list, where you and Dirk have brought about with that amazing cast that you got as well.
I felt incredibly vindicated, and also did not feel any regret for anything that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because what was very, very obvious was we couldn't have made the thing that we'd made for Audible for the BBC. We would have had a time slot. It would have been, okay, get each episode into 15 minutes or whatever.
Like happened with Dirk's Spider-Man and his Batman and what have you.
Exactly. We would have had a time slot. We would have had compromises would have had to have been made. And the glorious thing about doing it with Audible is it's absolutely uncompromised. Each episode is as long as it needs to be. We got an incredible cast. We were lucky that we got to record almost everybody before lockdown. How we're going to do the next rounds, I'm not sure whether there'll be studios filled with plexiglass partitions or whether we're going to just try and do people at home or whatever. I don't know, but I do know that Audible is incredibly happy, and we now get to do this to the end.
Which is that's the best possible situation to be in. I mean, that's so. And what I loved about it as a fan, you know, like many, there are many, you know, Sandman fans out there in the comic book and the narrative ecosystem like myself. But it was absolutely the fact that it is so complete. I found that very compelling, and I just thought that you guys, between the two of you, had done such a great job with the casting, and that must feel particularly satisfying.
That was so satisfying, and what I loved is I had almost nothing to do with the casting. I would get involved in casting when they get stuck. So, you know, there was we couldn't find a Desire because we knew that if we were going to have a Desire, they had to be non-binary, and I suggested Justin Vivian Bond, and was thrilled that they wanted to do it, and they did it so beautifully.
Yeah.
And you know, thrilled that Dirk said yes. Things like that. Kat Dennings, who
she was so on point, so perfect.
She really was
great.
And just, that was one where I knew Kat and just had seen her performances and things and thought she has that lovely cheerfulness, that wonderful upbeat quality, and was just trying to think of somebody. And again, we were running out of time, and I called Kat and said, "Can you do it?" And she said yes. Or Bebe Neuwirth for
so good.
Siamese Cat. Such a glorious performance. And I'd done an audio drama of Snowglass Apples with Bebe for a long forgotten, long failed thing. Failed is the wrong word. The Sci-Fi Channel tried doing some audio dramas.
I remember those.
I think called Seeing Ear Theatre.
Yeah.
And it was just ahead of its time. There was nothing wrong with what they did at all. What they did was fabulous. They did that. For me, they also did Murder Mysteries starring Brian Dennehy. And it was great. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, if you were doing it now with that kind of cast, would get a lot of attention. But back then, nobody knew that you could listen to things on the web, and nobody was going to listen to things on the web.
Yeah. I think I think that's a very good point. I think another vocal performance that I really enjoyed, as somebody who hails from Merseyside originally, was Taron Egerton as Constantine. I thought he was pretty bang on as well in terms of what I expected him to sound like.
I loved that. I thought he was so. I mean, you know, I stopped myself because the problem is then you just get into this enormous list.
The list of names and endless. Yeah.
Taron was Dirk's idea, which was great. Lucifer, Michael Sheen was me. That was...
and so right for it. Yeah, so right for it.
What I wasn't expecting was, of course, I forget working with Michael. I know that Michael is one of the greatest actors of his generation. That one I know. I forget that Michael is also one of the greatest impressionists. Impressionist is the wrong word. That sounds like Mike Yarwood. The greatest, you know, he evokes people.
Yeah.
and he can do this amazing thing with his voice and with his sinuses and what have you. He deploys them all, and the fact that Bowie was how Lucifer was drawn when he first appeared. So that was how Michael decided to play it. And all of a sudden, I'm standing there while it's being recorded, and it's, if I'm looking, it's definitely Michael Sheen. If I look away, David Bowie is talking to me.
No, that really was lovely. He is incredibly transformative as an actor, I think. It's like, the Damned United playing Brian Clough. You wouldn't put him in the same room as Brian Clough. He's just having a chat, but then he brings it. He's amazing at that. And of the many adaptations that you've had of your work in other media, which of the ones are the ones that you're most proud of and pleased with as an execution of your work outside of the printed page?
I love Coraline.
That's great. It's great. That's my
Henry,
daughter's favorite film, by the way.
I'm so glad. It's always people will either come up to me and tell me Coraline is their offspring's favorite film, or they will tell me about their offspring watching Coraline, having to sleep in their bed with the lights on for the next 4 months. I think Henry did something really special on that. And that was an occasion where I knew what I wanted, and I managed to get it. And I look back now at that and think, how did I get that? How did that work? Because I finished writing Coraline, and I said to my agent, will you get this to Henry Selick? And I said that at a time when most people hadn't quite twigged who Henry was, because Tim Burton's name was all over The Nightmare Before Christmas, and nobody seemed to have noticed that actually it was directed and basically built from scratch by Henry Selick. And I then went and saw James the Giant Peach and loved that, and that was a Henry Selick film too. And I thought, okay, you and that amazing stop motion thing you do, that's what I want in this. And went out to Henry, who at that time was doing a lot of live action stuff, had just done a film called Monkey Bone, and wanted to do Coraline as a live action film. So he wrote the script as a live action script.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which I think was an incredibly important thing, because having written that script as a live action script, he then wound up hooking up with Laika, who talked briefly about doing it as a computer animated movie, but then talked about doing maybe it 2 different ways. Maybe they would computer animate the other world and stop motion animate this world or something. But then they came up with the idea of doing it in 3D and changing the nature of the 3D, which is astonishing. And so I was thrilled because they made an animated stop motion film, which is what I dreamed of Coraline. My theory was simply that if you made a live action film of Coraline, it would be too scary. Possibly not too scary for the kids, but absolutely too terrifying for any adults in the audience. And I thought, okay, if it's animation and these are dolls or puppets moving around, on some level that will guard you, that will keep you safe from it being too incredibly terrifying. And Henry is a genius. What he and Laika did with that film is still brilliant. It was nominated for an Oscar in a year that it couldn't get the Oscar, because Up was nominated for Best Motion Picture, and Up was not going to get Best Motion Picture, so which meant that Up had to get Best Animated, because you can't nominate an animated film as Best Motion Picture and then give Best Animated to something else. So it meant that the Oscars was a surprisingly stress-free event, because it was not like any of us were going, will we win? I'm saying, well, obviously we can't win. The way this thing is designed, we are seat fillers. But I think Coraline, more than any of the other films that were nominated that year, and more than many other films that have been and come and gone, has shown that it has legs, and it finds its own audience over and over. It doesn't seem to date. It doesn't seem to be forgotten. You know, Stardust, I thought Matthew Vaughn and Jane Goldman made a lovely film. It's
That's
sweet.
a personal favorite of mine, by the way, Stardust. I think it's awesome. It's fantastic.
I think it holds up incredibly well.
It really does, yeah.
And I think they you know, they did that Princess Bride thing.
Yes, yeah.
And I remember saying to the then head of Paramount that, you know, all you have to do here is sell it like Princess Bride. And the then head of Paramount looked at me horrified and said, Princess Bride came in number 4 to a Dudley Moore movie. We are not doing that. And of course, completely missing that the legs of Princess Bride.
The longevity of it all, the cultural impact of it, yeah.
Yeah, and Stardust has not had that cultural impact, and it's kind of faded away a bit. But I love that. I love what it did, and I love that for so many people, it was their favorite movie. And I love kind of how well it's lasted and how you can go back to it and still love it, which makes me happy. But it has kind of receded into, well, that was 13 years ago. Whereas Coraline, which came out the year after, might have been released this week. I mean,
absolutely. And I see that up close. Lucifer, my daughter, she's always playing it for her friends, and you know, and then you know, she's got older for her younger friends, or you know, the students that she teaches or whatnot, and it's I absolutely see it having that life, and it is really a movie that arrests its audience. You know, when you see kids watching it for the first time, they're just in it. You know, they're just in it for that 90 minutes. Yeah.
It was, and also I think my appreciation of it improved as well, I should say, because I had it, because they gave me, you know, when it was released digitally, they just gave me the code. So it's sitting on my phone in my iMovies, and it was sitting there at a time when I wasn't using any iMovies or anything. So that was the only thing on my phone. And the point where I had a 18-month-old son who I desperately needed one night to entertain so that I could get something done, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning and I was on a deadline and his mum was off doing a gig, and I put that on for him, and it became for about a year his favorite thing. So, and it would only be the first 25 minutes. That was what he liked watching. Once some drama started coming into it,
it was too intense.
It was too intense for a tiny kid who was really at sort of Wooden Tops level. He wanted nice people having a nice time, and the opening stuff of them arriving in the house and meeting the people and stuff, that was what he loved. But it meant that I got to watch that 1,000 times, and it never got old, and I would find new things, and I would marvel at the fact that anything you were seeing on that screen had been put there by hand and was being moved by hand between frames, and on a good day, they would get 7 seconds of usable film in the can. The thing that astonished me most, that I should have known, I mean, you would think about it, but it had never occurred to me, was when I learned when I went out there, was that every scene, of course, gets rehearsed. And they rehearse it, and they film it as a rehearsal, and then that would get
and now that is fascinating. It's never crossed my mind before, but it makes complete sense now you say it.
It's one of those things which, as soon as you say it, and in my case, as soon as you see it, you go, well, of course you would do that to find out how it worked and where the problems are. And of course you'd go and show that to Henry as director, and he'll say, well, you know, change this and let's move the camera and stuff. But it had never occurred to me. So of course, everything is shot twice. And not just twice, everything is shot 3 or 4 times or more than that because they have to get it right. So it's not like we just shoot, they go through shooting frame by frame. Those things are going to get shot many times and things are going to happen many times.
Yeah, I think that is fascinating and a treat to be able to, a real treat. I mean, it's great to have your work adapted like that, but I mean, such a blessing, but it's also a blessing to be able to be inside the process, which is a kind of behind the velvet curtain thing that must be, for somebody with the interest that you have, must be a real buzz to be there in that moment.
It is, although there's always a little part of me that feels like it's storing everything up for a book that I've never written.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
When I cannot be on a TV set, particularly TV sets for some reason, TV and film sets, but especially TV, without starting to plot murder mysteries set on TV sets. You just sort of start going, oh, okay, there's this person and that person and this person, and that's what they do and stuff. And wouldn't it be great to do a murder mystery? Because then you'd have to go around and ask these people questions. And who do you kill? Well, I suppose, do I kill David Tennant or Michael Sheen? And if I kill them, then, okay, where are we going to find the body? And I just start plotting murder mysteries that I will never write.
Surely, Neil, you have to write those books. They would be awesome.
But there is, I mean, I sort of understand why Simon Brett did his Charles Paris books.
Yes.
Because he knew that background, and you just want to take people to worlds they don't know. It's part of the joy. It's like one of the weirdly unspoken joys of Stephen King. And it was something that I remember 1992, first time I met Stephen King. And he and his family came to a signing that I was doing to invite me to dinner. And it was a signing for Season of Mists in, I think, Million Year Picnic in Boston. And there were many thousands of people there. And so I didn't get to go to dinner with Stephen King. Instead, I met him at about 10 or 11 o'clock at night in his hotel suite. And we ordered burgers from room service and sat on the floor and ate them. Me and there were people like Steve Bissett and Scott McCloud and Michael Zully. And the next day I met the Kings for lunch, just me. And they were saying, this world of comics is so cool. Why don't you do a novel set in that world? And I was like, well, who'd be interested in that? That's not, it felt weird and wrong. And then shortly after, a few years after, Steve did Cell. Yeah, and there's a comic artist as the protagonist. And I thought, that's you doing that thing of going, well, hey, this is a really good, interesting job. Why don't, it's a great job for a protagonist to have. And I think, I mean, part of I wouldn't have wanted to write that, a character who was a comics writer or set in comics, just because I thought everybody is going to be assuming it's a Romain Clef. Yeah. And they're going to be looking for who is who, and am I spilling the dirt on anybody? And I thought, I don't think I could do that thing. But now I am older, I really appreciate that thing of just places where you can, as an author, can take readers that they wouldn't have gone on their own. Whether it's the world of 1990s comics or, working on a Scottish Island croft. Yeah. Or a TV set. The joy is you get to take people and show them this wonderful place.
Now that's interesting me, because talking of transporting people, one of your favorite projects in the last decade or so that I really enjoyed was your reading with Christmas Carol that you did. It was in New York, right? I think, yeah. And could you just talk about the genesis of that a bit? Because I really enjoyed that. I thought it was which was Charles Dickens' original performance version of A Christmas Carol, performed by yourself in full Dickens mode as well.
That was my condition for doing it. They approached me. New York Public Library has Dickens's copy, his performance copy of A Christmas Carol. And one of the things that Dickens did he was famous for doing public performances, public readings of his work. What he'd do with A Christmas Carol is he would edit it and hone it and refine it and edit it and hone it and refine it for performance. He would cut bits, he would do little rewrites, and this went on for years. He would go and work it out. And I got asked by New York Public Library if I would come and read the Dickens performance version of A Christmas Carol. And for reasons that I do not remember, I said I would only do it. It was for a Christmas performance.
Yeah.
I said I would only do it if they could provide costume and makeup for me to do it as Dickens. And bless them, they said yes. So I turned up. They bearded me, they hatted me, they suited me, and I walked out and did it. And anybody, when you listen to the podcast, listen to the whole thing, especially the introduction before I come on, where you will learn many secrets about Charles Dickens, including how much he drank before.
Oh yeah, because he had that sherry breakfast that he used to eat.
He would have his special sherry with raw eggs and champagne in it, and he knocked this stuff back as his magical breakfast. And I got to read it, and the reading it was such an education for me, because going into it, I was vaguely disappointed by some of the most famous lines and famous bits that he'd cut out. Lines that you think of as archetypal A Christmas Carol lines, and why would he cut that bit out? That's famous. Everybody loves that. And then why he'd leave bits in.
Because it focuses very heavily on the Cratchit's dining rituals, for example.
Exactly, or the fat cousin.
Yes, yeah.
The plump cousin who I've never seen an adaptation that includes the plump cousin, and yet Dickens does the plump cousin. So it's like, well, I wonder why. And what you discover is that what Dickens had built out of trial and error was the perfect performing machine, and all of the bits are necessary to give you the highs and the lows, and after you get the terror, then you get the high comedy, and then you get the low comedy, and it actually is this beautiful thing that works. And if I hadn't have had to get up there in front of an audience to find out if it worked, I wouldn't have known it worked. I don't think I would even have thought that it worked, because so much of it seems counterintuitive.
And it's an insight that you get from performing it in front of an audience and having the interaction with the audience. None of those insights are apparent when you actually read it. I mean, it's a fascinating document to read, but I think that they did a great job with recording that event. And of course, it's had a tremendous life on Spotify and whatnot. It's out there perennially to listen to at Christmas. And if there's anybody watching this, any Forbidden Planet customers and fans of Neil's who haven't listened to that, I would say that is a seasonal must listen to for all the reasons you've just said, actually, mate. It's a fascinating thing to have done, and supremely effective, I think, tremendously enjoyable.
I'm so lucky that I get these weird opportunities to do things. And, some of it I look back on, and there are questions that I ask myself, like, why did I do this thing? Some of it seems incredibly counterintuitive. I, as somebody in his 20s and early 30s, had crippling and terrible stage fright. The idea of getting up on stage in front of actual human beings and doing anything was terrifying to me. And one reason I started doing it was just when the world began to go digital in you know, and we're talking really early. We're talking 1991, 92, something like that. I remember thinking, you know, copyright is going to break. Copyright is not designed for this thing. This thing that is, it's not even happening yet, but I can see it happening on the horizon, the infinitely reproducible things. And if we go back to a Wild West of copyright, or of copyright being fundamentally valueless, in the same way that we did when the copyright laws were just beginning and you had, you know, Dickens being pirated all over the world, a best-selling author, but not making any of the money that he should have been, because I thought, well, what he did was, he did readings, because when you're selling a reading, you're selling a unique experience. And that's the one thing that is not copyable. The idea that you are going to have a unique experience. I should learn how to do readings. And I started doing them for charity. They were all fundraisers. I was not certain enough of my ability to get up in front of an audience and charge them for tickets and keep any of the proceeds, but I knew that I could do it for good causes, and just started doing it. And the first few years were absolutely terrifying, and the next few years were a little bit less terrifying. And now I'm in a world in which I get to do audiobooks, and I get to appear, and I get to do, you know, the idea that 2 years ago I did that amazing BBC Radio with Great Pleasure thing with John Finnemore and Peter Capaldi and Nina Shasanya and Mitch Benn, and we, you know, reading bits from things that I loved in front of an audience. And the fact that then I did the even stranger thing last year with David Tennant and Amanda and the BBC Symphony Orchestra, taking things of mine and putting them up on stage and reading them at the Barbican in front of a huge audience, and knowing they were going out on the radio. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't terrifying. It was a skill that I'd gone through the fire and learned how to do. And actually, copyright has lasted much better than I ever thought that it would in 1991, 92. So I'm delighted to have been proved more or less wrong by that. But
I think it's a lovely cautionary, fear-based outcome. Actually, it's the perfect way for that to deliver. Neil, can I ask you, what are you working on at the moment that you can talk to us about? What have you got coming up?
The problem with that question is that you can talk to us about. Because
understood.
Offhand, the 4 most interesting things that I'm working on right now, I can't talk to you about, which they're just all completely off the table. And they're so cool. And I can't talk about. What can I talk? Actually, one of the most interesting things I can talk about, which is I'm working on the Sandman TV series.
Yes, which is with Netflix, right?
It is with Netflix. I'm working, I'm an executive producer, but a really involved and working one. You know, American Gods always wound up, for whatever reasons, with me at arm's length. Often wanting to be more involved and giving notes and things, but not actually in the trenches. Pretty much off to one side with other people making it, and me going, well, yes, or me going, oh, you know, I wouldn't have done it like that, but whatever. Sandman is not that. Sandman, it's not the Good Omens thing of I am doing everything, I am digging every hole that needs to be dug, and I'm mixing the cement and I'm pouring the cement in, and, you know, this is, if it's here, it's because I put it there.
Yeah.
But working very closely with Alan Heinberg, who is the showrunner, and with David Goyer, who is my co-executive producer.
Right. Okay.
And we co-wrote the first episode, the pilot. And then after that, it's basically been Alan and writers, and Alan working with writers, and then me working with Alan on the scripts. And right now, not a day goes by, but I don't see, a dozen casting videos. The process of auditioning now is one, because of COVID, that is occurring. People aren't even going into an office now. People are just self-taping at home, and you're getting to watch their self-tape. So, last night it was Coranzon and Squatter Bloat auditions, and the day before it was Maidens and Mothers and Crones. And I'm loving it. I get to see these amazing actors playing the parts and putting it together. And we've got a director starting, I think, August the 17th.
Wow.
And very, very soon we'll be shooting, assuming that the world doesn't go into another lockdown or something.
Yeah.
So
fingers crossed.
All fingers crossed, toes crossed, anything that you can possibly cross legs for me. But so I'm really excited about Sandman. The first season is going to be basically, it's Preludes and Nocturnes and then The Doll's House. And they actually fit really well in 10 episodes. There's a certain amount of, there are places where there definitely isn't enough story in one comic to be a 50-minute thing, but there's enough story in 2 comics. So we're basically taking, I think, about 17 comics and compressing them into 10 episodes. And that's really fun. And we're getting to do cool things with them where we just get to look at everything as if we were doing it now. And I've seen people online hearing me say that and go, oh, he is, it's going to be this or that. And I'm like, oh, why would I do that to my baby? You are completely missing the point.
Right.
The joy of doing the Dirk Maggs Sandman Audible project, we did it exactly like the graphic novels. We did it exactly like the graphic novels for a number of reasons, including the fact that visually impaired people or people whose brains don't process comics and so on and so forth have never been able to access this stuff, and now they can. And
it's a wonderful outcome. I think that's fantastic.
It really is. It's like, why would I change this thing? You haven't been able to read it, now you can.
Yeah.
But what's lovely is when we started to talk about what we were doing, we came up with a couple of different options. And the one that we just all liked the best, that felt right, and felt right in an interesting storytelling way, was, well, we're not going to move the beginning of Sandman. We're not moving it up because it's actually based on a real historical event in 1916-17, when you did get the encephalitis lethargica and people did fall asleep and not wake up. And you had this wave of sleepy sickness, this strange disease that just took people out, and some of them woke up, decades later. So we're still going to start then, but instead of Morpheus escaping imprisonment in September 1988, he's going to escape imprisonment in 2021 or 2022.
Yes, okay, yeah.
And okay, if we're doing that, what does it change? And if we're doing that, what are we allowed to change? And there are definitely places where it's not, and I watched people getting grumpy when I said this first, as if Sandman had not been probably the most diverse and representational comic that existed at its time anyway. So it's like, well, it's not like I'm going to, but there's definitely a point where now one of the things that's genuinely fun is being able to go, well, we have this character. This character is, well, they were male in 1988. They need to be male now. Is there a reason why they're male? And if the answer is yes, you know, they need their penis to open a door with or something,
Yeah.
then they're still male. And sometimes, even if it's ambiguous, they're still male. And sometimes it's like, actually, there's no reason at all why that character couldn't be female, and let's do that. That feels like we could get sparks flying. This could be a certain amount of fun. So we're doing that kind of thing where you just, anything's open. It's, or you actually try and view results. People have talked about, you know, people get going, but that means that Morpheus would have missed the last Hobgadling meeting.
Yeah.
And, you know, how can you do that? To which I explain, wait and see. This is, you know, we know.
Yeah.
But it's genuinely fun, and it allows us to tell the same stories in occasionally unfamiliar ways, and occasionally tell, you know, it allows us to be absolutely faithful while still having surprises for people who loved the material, which is what I tried to do, in all honesty, on Good Omens. When I was doing the adaptation of that, I was like, okay, well, I want this to be a thing that people who love the book love. And I also want things that people who love the book are going, you know, I want places where they'll be way ahead of somebody who doesn't know the book. And I want places where they have no idea what's coming either, because why should they lose the fun of not knowing what's going to happen next?
Well said. I mean, I can't wait to see it. I know that there's going to be a ton of people watching this who feel exactly the same way. Are you going to be releasing in 21, do you think? Have you got any idea when the show's going to be out?
I have no idea when it's releasing now. I did do, but
yeah,
you know, those
but of course,
based around us starting shooting in May.
Yeah,
we did.
Yeah.
So right now, I think we just wait and we see.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if the next news, somewhere in the next couple of months, you know, probably the next big news will be some casting news.
Right. Well, I very much look forward to hearing that. And I very much look forward to being able to chat to you about the other things that you can't talk to us about right now.
They're really cool.
I can't wait. So one of the things we're doing with FP42 is giving birth to FPTV, where we're going to have a regular online broadcast channel. So Neil, it would be great if you could come back and join us for a future edition. That would be awesome.
I would love to do that one day. I mean, and also, you know, it's funny because we started talking about Forbidden Planet, and there's so much, you know, there's so many intersections with my life and FP, and following FP from Denmark Street to New Oxford Street, and from New Oxford Street to Shaftesbury Avenue, and, you know, so many glorious relationships and friendships that have been forged there, and stuff, and we didn't even get a chance to do those. So we have to do FPTV so we can talk about that stuff and tease Nick and Vivian.
Well, of course, I mean, we haven't even got into that, and it's a very important part of doing these things.
So Nick and I share a birthday.
Yeah, which you, by the way, you also share with my son. So the three of you have your birthday on the same day. Yeah, all the great people in the world, I guess. It was
us and Richard Burton.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing this hour with us, Neil. And we look forward to doing it again.
I would love that. That was really fun. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Oh, that's my pleasure. I'll do my sign out, which is you have been watching Forbidden Planet's favorite super talented multi-hyphenate, Neil Gaiman. Join us again for FP42, and thanks very much, Neil. Thank you, mate.
Thank you for inviting me. I had fun.